All right, how's it going, guys? World Lit Week 10, wrapping up The Stranger here today. I hope you enjoyed this book. Many people do, but there are a lot of people who don't also. I think it's an important book, whether it's a fun book or not. So we hadn't talked about the second half at all. To summarize the second half briefly, and to remind those of you who read it some weeks ago, we'll remind you that in the second half, Meursault is in prison, awaiting his trial for the murder of, as the book calls it, the Arab man. Early on in this part, we see that police officers and priests are completely confused and befuddled by Meursault. They call him a demon and a devil, but their interpretation of him is not quite right, because Meursault did not enjoy the act of murder. He most likely regrets doing it and doesn't even really know why he did it. And I think that's one of the strange things about reading this for the first time, because it's from his perspective. When we are in his head, we expect to get more intimate thoughts and feelings from him, but we just do not. And I don't think it's that the character is hiding those thoughts and feelings from the reader. I think it's simply that he doesn't have them or doesn't understand them, doesn't pretend to understand what they mean. And when you talk about meaning, I think it's important at this point in our conversation of the book to talk more about the philosophical concept of existentialism. Now, existentialism is famously difficult to define and to discuss. So you could go read and watch a million YouTube videos about what existentialism is and what the absurd or absurdism is, and you might be confused. There are many aspects of existentialism, and I won't pretend to be an expert, but I do think that a couple principles that I'm interested in from existentialism apply to this book. And one of those is that within existentialism, central to the idea of existentialism is that there is no meaning in events. So we naturally walk around in our lives applying meaning to things that happen, right? We happen to be the only living beings on the planet that do this, that we believe that event has meaning, that things happen for a reason, that this is something we can learn from and apply in future events, right? But existentialism does not attempt to find meaning in life or in event. Just as you might think it's silly for an ant or a beetle or a fish to look for meaning in their lives, existentialists argue that we are just as significant as them, meaning we are not significant, and that there is no cosmic meaning to what happens to us. So take this example. Let's say that there is a man running out of a New York City building because he is in a rush. As he is coming out of the building and into the sidewalk, he does not see that the ground has moved just a little because of weather conditions over time, and the sidewalk has raised just a little bit on part of it. You've seen this on sidewalks before, just a little crack. He does not see this crack, even though he uses this sidewalk often because it is new. And let's say that it trips him up. The man flies uncontrollably into the street, and let's say that in that moment, a car speeds by, hitting the man and him dying. Most philosophical principles, schools of thought, as well as religious schools of thought, would attempt to find meaning in this event. They would say, perhaps this happened for a reason. They would say, perhaps this is part of some larger plan. They would say that there can be something learned from this event. An existentialist would argue that there is no cosmic reason why the sidewalk was cracked there. There is a practical scientific reason that the soil dried because it was a hot year, not enough moisture, and so the foundation for that built sidewalk moved. But that does not mean that God had any say in whether this man ran into it. And other people might say, but the car came by just at that precise moment, and maybe that car was supposed to hit him. And maybe his family members were supposed to learn something from this event. And an existentialist would say, no, that car could have been any other car, or it could have not been there. But it was not for a reason, it just happened to be that someone was traveling by at that moment. Now that's hard for us to wrap our heads around because we happen to think that what happens in our lives is kind of important, and along some kind of hero's journey, some kind of path. But Camus and his character Marsal, I don't believe, think this way. I don't think that they see themselves as heroes on a journey at all. And I don't think that they believe that they are on some sort of planned life toward a supreme goal. Marsal doesn't see any meaning in event, and so he doesn't look for it. And that is what I think the police and the ministers and the judges have such a problem with Marsal and call evil. And you see, if you have a philosophy and a belief that everything does have meaning, and it's important for you to think that and hold that close to you, someone walking around that feels differently and thinks differently might bother you, right? Ultimately, I don't think Marsal is sentenced to death because he killed a man. Now, you could argue that that could have happened even if this person was repentant, even if Marsal would have said he was sorry and would have converted to Christianity with that priest, that maybe they would have killed him anyway. But you could equally make the case that it's not the murder that bothers them so much, right? They seem to be just as upset about the fact that he can't quite cry about his mom being gone, or that he doesn't quite seem sorry or sad enough. That he is an oddball, that he is strange and he has strange ideas. I think that's what they kill him for. I think that's why they don't like him, Looking at the end of the book, the final lines, Marsal is getting ready to be executed soon, and sitting in his cell, and he has a moment of peace and a moment of quiet. And he's not upset at all, which is of course strange for many of us to think, right? And he said, I opened myself to the gentle indifference of the world, finding it so much like myself, so like a brother really. I felt that I had been happy, and that I was happy again. For everything to be consummated, for me to feel less alone, I had only to wish that there be a large crowd of spectators the day of my execution, and that they greet me with cries of hate. For Marsal, he has trouble identifying with other human beings because they have expectations and because they try to apply meaning to event and to life. But as he says in those final lines, the world, read that as the universe, read that as the cosmos, has a gentle indifference toward him. Indifference meaning it doesn't like him or dislike him. And gentle meaning it's not as if he is being punished. It's just that the universe doesn't care. And not in that mean way that you say when you're fighting with a friend, I don't care what you say. No, in the literal sense of the word, Marsal doesn't care. And he thinks perhaps the universe doesn't care. And so he feels like a brother with that kind of thinking. And he feels sort of a peace about it. And I think he sort of because he does have a sense of humor, and he does care about things. He mentions happiness, that's a feeling. I think he does sort of like the idea of getting those people all riled up, because it's so easy for him to do. So I'm going to wrap because I'm seeing I hit 10 minutes and we're needing to move on to Persepolis. But that's The Stranger. Man, as I said, an easy read in terms of you know what all the words mean, and it's a short book, but a powerful one, a big one philosophically, and so much else to say. But those are the things that resonate with me the most. If you choose to write on The Stranger in paper too, of course, feel free to go in different thematic directions, okay? When you're ready, move on to video 3. We're going to start talking about Persepolis, and it's a fun one. If you thought this was like too bleak and sad, okay, this one's about war and death too, but there's some laughs, and it's a comic book. So let's move on. When you're ready to move on to Persepolis, see you for part 3.